Thanks everyone for joining us for another 2026 Vermont Vegetable and Berry Growers Winter Webinar Series. I wish I slipped the word spring into it so spring could come, but here we are. Um, very excited today and very grateful to our speakers for taking time out of the busy spring afternoon to be with us. Today we're talking about innovative soil health strategies, reduced tillage, and cover cropping. And we're going to start out with Mike Snow from Post Mills Egg and Grain, and also the executive director of the Connecticut River Farmers Watershed Farmers Alliance, and a huge asset to the farming community across the board. So thank you, Mike, for coming. Kaity Mazza, who's farm manager at Paul Mazza's Fruits and Vegetables, is going to take some time to share some of their experiences with reduced tillage. So thank you, Kaity. And we're going to wrap up with Noah and Sophie Courser-Kellerman, who have recently relocated to Warner, New Hampshire, and they've got some great things to share on a slightly smaller scale, reduced tillage and cover cropping. So we're going to cruise through it. Thank you. Mike, I'm going to hand it over to you to share your screen and we'll get going from there.
Okay, thank you. So last time I gave this talk a month ago, it took me about 25 minutes. So some things I'm going to skip over and some things I'm going to say as fast as I can. Um, all right, so Mike Snow, like Becky said, I grow dry beans and grains on a small scale, some vegetables, and I raise poultry. And I also run the Connecticut River Watershed Farmers Alliance. We're one of the watershed groups. We do a bunch of things. The idea is we try to problem solve things collectively. We have equipment sharing. We do workshops. We recycle plastic. We help people connect with folks who can help them with on-farm trials, things like that. Glad to answer questions. Anyways, I do want to mention that uh, the information I'm going to share is part my experience and also a lot of the experience that have come from Lincoln Fishman and in particular Andrew Woodruff in terms of a piece of equipment, and Julie Fine, who's created this reduced tillage group in New England, which is really valuable. It's a chance for people to get together and share our experience and try to learn faster and learn from each other. Thanks. Thank you, Julie, for being here too. All right, so we rent equipment, which is sort of how I got into this. A lot of our equipment comes through the Vermont SEAP program, Conservation Equipment Assistance Program. We have drills, which can help with strip tilling in some ways. No-till drills, different types. Also, equipment for frost seeding, soil health monitoring, scales for reducing, so we can properly balance our tractors for reducing compaction. And then we also have this network of tools that we can connect people with. For example, this year we have a 3-row ripper and a wet lime spreader if you're interested. Okay, so we got a grant a year and a half ago from the state, one for a larger strip till unit. We were able to save a bunch of money, so we also built a smaller one. And we are trying to refine that and make improvements. So now I'm going to talk about how we got there. So the first thing with trying to reduce tillage and do strips is maybe all of us have tried, or if you haven't, it's worth trying, I guess. Taking tines out of a rototiller or using one of these old berry renovators or for tilling in between berry rows, I guess. It works, but my experience was it wasn't great. So it's worth mentioning. It's fine to try, and I encourage you to try it. You'll see what works and doesn't. The one thought I've had recently is that in other parts of the world, especially like in paddy situations, people use these J tines, very different type of tine. You can see on the 3 other images. Not as beefy and not as kind of like an L so much, but more like a J. It might be worth trying something like that for this kind of context. And there are a couple companies, mainly in Europe, that are now making something that like a better version of this, right? So you can see that there's like a shank in front of the tillers, and that's the main difference. Um, and that you'll see also later as we talk that may be what makes it work better. So just something to think about. Um, Worth talking about, like, what are you trying to achieve? That matters. Your soil types matter. If you have compaction, if you're organic or not, that matters because then you're thinking about, well, how am I going to deal with these strips? And we'll get into that. Um, and then there's, as Lincoln says, there's these two things, right? You either zip or you strip. And zipping is where you just kind of make a real small hole in the ground or small run in the ground. And a strip is something larger. And we found so far that um, people tend to be more successful with bigger plants, right? Transplants in the zips, and strips allow you to have a greater likelihood of succeeding with transplants, but also mainly larger seeded crops. I don't know if anyone's sort of at the point where they can do strips and feel comfortable growing carrots, but we might get there. So it's worth trying at some point. Anyway, zipping is as simple as this: a coulter and a shank. When I started, I had access to one of these keyline plows, and that's how we started putting tomatoes into cover crop, into bare ground. We just sort of trying all different things. It worked okay. I was never really quite satisfied with it. But to give you a sense of what it can do and what it looks like, right? This is like a scalpel in the ground. It's really precise. So you still may have a lot of competition. You can put seeders on these things. They're usually not really precise, but they work and really good, especially for pasture. Um, but that may translate into using like a living cover crop of, say, Dutch white clover, and trying to grow crops into that. So we're trying. This is sort of the evolution of the equipment, right? This is the Vermont rip sower, which is available through the Land Care Cooperative. And this is an example of this came from uh, Maple Wind Farm in Richmond. They have had really good success with this so far in pasture situation. Okay, in my experience, a strip is better, and I want a wider strip so that we can cultivate. So you could go ahead and develop something like this. People have been working, none of this is new. People have been working on this for a while. Um, at Cornell, for example, they've been working on this. They call it deep zone tillage. And I'm just going to show you different examples of how people have approached this. Um, this is a Yetter set, like a Yetter fertilizer knife with coulter and a couple extra pieces. You see row cleaners in the front. Um, Ron Morris at Virginia Tech really liked this as a way to transplant. He called this a no-till planting aid, and he does use this in a system where he would grow a high residue cover crop on a shaped bed, actually. Usually it was often millet and cowpeas or something like that, maybe Sesbania in Virginia. And then he would plant a summer planted broccoli into it. Really successful. We tried that. It worked. It was beautiful. That was when I was farming in Virginia, excuse me. Anyways, J.M. Shirk is sort of the more affordable American version of the keyline plow from Pennsylvania. Okay, so here's the basics. If you're gonna make a strip, you have a lead coulter. You may or may not have a shank. We can talk about when you might want that or when you might not need it, but you obviously reduce the horsepower required if you don't have a shank. And if your ground is mellow, you may not need it. And then we have two sets of discs, or one set of discs that are offset. I'll show you more. And then some way to finish that or pack it down so that it's plantable or seedable. Some people will add row cleaners, maybe a seeder, um, and maybe a fertilizer hopper. I'm just going to show a few images of all different setups. This is a heavy duty unit. This might take 20 to 40 horsepower per shank per row unit. This is an Unverferth, but you see it's got this huge shank there in the middle. Similar. And this one is down at just to again show you sort of there's a lead coulter and then the shank and then these two offset wavy coulters and then a rolling basket in the back. And that one is down at Gideon Port's Place, Atlas Farm in Massachusetts. So we ended up with this one, a Dawn unit. Really like Dawn because they kind of re-engineered this from scratch. They are one of the companies at the forefront of the regenerative ag movement, meaning they have been really thoughtful about the system that these machines are used in. And that's so we see things in their product that are just a little more well thought out. They were nice to work with. They provided us this demonstration unit at a low cost, which allowed us to build another one. You can see, so that's going into, on the right, you can see that we were running it into a living Dutch white clover mulch. Again, just to give you a sense, the thing about buying a piece of equipment like this, and this may take anywhere from 10 to 30 horsepower per row, probably really closer to 30, 25, 30, but the nice thing is that it's really thoughtfully designed, and I'm not sure if you can see, but up front there's a wavy-ish coulter. That's the lead coulter, and then a set of row cleaners, and there's like this pneumatic air pressure thing that allows you to be more aggressive or less aggressive with the row cleaners. And then the two wavy coulters that do like the zone building, they are angled. And I'll show you in a sec, but they're angled and then you've got the packing wheels behind. So there's the row cleaners, not required, but handy. And then you can sort of see on the left, the wavy coulter on the left, that's at an angle. So it's does that much better than something that we build ourselves, right? And then you can get different attachments. We've got fertilizer injectors and different types of baskets for the back, depending on your soil conditions and your interest. All right, so this is the other one that we built. Probably fits most of us better. I run it with a older 60 horsepower tractor. It doesn't need all that. This is the work it does, also into Dutch white clover. And Becky, tell me if I'm running out of time. But we based this on a design that Andrew Woodruff has developed on Martha's Vineyard. You can see up front is a lead coulter, straight coulter, a shank, and then two wavy coulters. And that's all it needs to be. He had also developed these really nice clamps for the wavy coulters that Mary Kate Cleary at Hampshire College can manufacture for you if you're interested. So we actually based it on this. This is a secondary design from Hampshire College. So we bought a toolbar from Buckeye Tractor. Ours is 6 feet wide. It's light duty, right? 2-inch square. We asked for it to be a little bit thicker, 1/4 inch thick. It has an open center so that we can set it up. So if we want to try 3 rows, we can try 3 rows. We've got 2. But basically 45 to 50 horsepower probably. Costs about $3,000. All right, if you're going to do this at home, here's what you're looking for. Lots of different kinds of coulters. But the lead coulter, this is sort of should be straight or maybe fluted. And a little bit bigger would be better. So 17 to 20 inches. And the important thing is that it stays in place, right? So if it swivels during the course of using it, it'll kind of throw everything off. The next piece is the shank. I'd argue that you don't need it, but in some soils, especially heavier soils, you probably do. If you have hard ground or the ground is dry, again, the shank will help. It'll help break everything up and it'll actually pull everything down into the ground a little bit. But it does mean you might need a little bit extra horsepower. So I think people have tried using these box blades, right? Pretty cheap from Agri Supply or somewhere like that, Tractor Supply. Um, they're not quite long enough to really do the job. Um, so on the left, you can see um, Buckeye Tractor sells a subsoiler shank. It's an inch thick. I think that's too wide. It's pretty big, heavy, it's a lot heavier, but it's long enough, 26 to 28 inches. Um, but you could try other things. So the thing on the far left there is a fertilizer knife. Um, that came with the fertilizer box. That might work. I also used this year or last year. I took a potato plow and just took the plow part off and used the thing that holds it on, right? And that was good enough. So anything can work. But generally, I'd shoot for about 3/4 inch wide. Okay, so the second the next set of discs, these are wavy coulters. Um, I think between Lincoln and Andy, they agree that like a 13 wave coulter is kind of our best successful bet. Um, 17 inches. We want to offset. So this one shows that sometimes people have tried four. And it's a little hard to see that they're offset, but the next picture, can you see the two wavy coulters there on the to the left of center? I can't see you saying yes. You can see it. Okay. Um,
Yes.
thank you. Um, so you want those offset. That will allow soil to flow through. You don't want them next to each other. The other, okay, so two other pieces with this. One, moving them in and out gives you a wider or smaller zone. I look for 9 to 10 inches. We'll talk about that in a second. But the other piece is you can have them angled in or out and get slightly different action. Something to play with as you kind of explore. The big companies talk about that too. Shallow, deep, lower, wider. Play with it, right? So the last piece is the finishing. You may find that you don't need that. You could try running over things afterwards with a like a tine weeder to try to uh, create a more regular seed bed. But that's, if you're direct seeding, that seed bed is really important for uniformity. So having something to pack it down in some way is good. And then the next question is, while you're making that pass, can you add anything? And I think we can, right? Figure it out. But a seeder would be handy. Andy's been using this dibble for transplanting, following up, and then transplanting by hand into the dibble holes. So just again, this is sort of the model. This is probably a little beefier than we need it to be. Andy was working with what he had, but that's what we base it on. That's what we're working with now. Give you a sense. So having 4 or 5 crossbars to mount things onto, handy, about a foot apart. And then this is sort of the next step. We're adding a fertilizer hopper on there. There you go. That's how it's supposed to be. And again, it works. It worked well. I have lighter soils.
I'm
Um,
surprised, Mike. That's how nice those strips are.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So I this was several passes. I did this in summer, and I ended up planting broccoli into these strips, transplanting broccoli, and I had a really nice crop. I was really pleased with it. Let me just mention a couple more things if I still have time. Yell at me if not. The
Yeah,
question
a
is,
couple minutes.
okay, great. So the question is, how do you manage this afterwards, right? And between the community of people doing this, I think we've tried a lot of things and we're still figuring it out. Obviously, like GPS would be great. That would probably be ideal, because keeping things centered matters. So there's the question of refreshing these strips and sort of stale seed bedding them. That's important. Always do this way as far ahead as you can, right? If you try to turn under even clover or your cover crop of rye, you know, it's got stuff it needs to break down just like regular tillage. So, you know, can we seed use a regular seeder? So this is my setup. And I'm really happy with this in bare ground. It does a good job overall for me. It's beat knives and fingers. Again, finger weeder is really nice, but you can see here, it's really important that you're parallel and precise with your planting. So if you're transplanting by hand and you're kind of, you know, even using a dibble, like a mechanical transplanter thing, or a rainflow transplanter, water wheel, you could be 4 inches off, right, within the line. And that doesn't work well with fingers. So my interest is how can you cultivate with fingers in some way? I actually have been following it up with fingers and then I put my tine weeder on the back, which feels weird to be tine weeding a living mulch in between, but it's fine. Or you can tie up the tines. But that's really the main thing is being able to stay in the row multiple passes. All right. Questions? Or should we do questions later?
Do a couple questions. Thank
Okay.
you, Mike. That's really
Yeah.
cool journey and really neat how you've evolved and shaped and shared information with everybody. Early on, someone was asking what lab is when you're talking about the ripper sower.
Lactic acid bacteria. So think of microbes that you can culture on the farm. And people seem to have success using that in the soil and on plants and for a feed.
Great. Katie, why don't you start pulling up your slides? And if anyone else has a question, you can we can take maybe one or two more questions. Vern, how many was several passes to turn under the clover?
Good question. Yeah.
Specifics, dude.
I hammered it, man. So we got a late start with these. They didn't come until kind of late spring. So, you know, you want a good seed bed, right? You know, and you want to make sure everything's broken down. Living clover, ideally would mow and then turn it under so that you have as little material above ground as possible. And then you got to let it digest. So for me, I was sort of in a rush to like make these zones. I probably went over it 4 times, maybe a fifth pass just before planting. It's more than one should. But if you have a soil that can digest material fast or well, then you would need less passes. You know, you start early. Do it the first one as early in the spring as you can. Fingers interact with the edge of the clover. Yeah, so that's to me. I didn't hand hoe at all. I did a little bit light scything to hit a couple of weeds that came up, taller ones, but um, the that's why you want a wider strip, right? Because with a set of fingers, it's not the fingers, the yellow fingers, it's actually the teeth on the bottom that need to hit the ground because that's what helps things spin properly. And so that's the challenge. I think at least 9 to 10 inches for the strip,
Great.
but it also needs to be centered. So that's the other challenge.
Awesome. Thanks, Spike. And I want to say, I mean, you mentioned that people have been doing this for a long time and playing around with it, but I think we know that it hasn't been like completely nailed for these diversified farms and different scales. And I'm really grateful to Katie she and her father have also played around with this or tried it for many, many years and jumped back in again last year. And I'm just really glad that you're willing to share, Katie, about what you guys experienced, and love to hear what you're planning for next year too. So I'll let you take it.
Awesome. Hi y'all, I'm Katie. So we this year, this past season, tried doing some no-till pumpkins. We grow about, I would say, 8 acres of pumpkins on our farm. So a decent amount, just enough for our farm stands. Then we wholesale a little bit to some of the stores around here. Previously, I guess this has been done long before me. My father had tried doing it. He had bought like a strip tiller and had tried doing it that way. But because of, I guess it was something with the technology in terms of like the computers and how it stays kind of centered in those rows with planting and everything, they had kind of turned away from doing that because it was getting a little bit expensive and they weren't seeing great success with it. Um, so we kind of picked it up last year after receiving a seed grant for a no-till seed drill. We figured we might as well try it again, see if we can do things a little bit differently now that there's been a lot of time and knowledge learned. So but then, of course, last spring happened. It was a wicked wet spring, and the spot that we were trying to go and plant on was also relatively heavy soil. We weren't able to get out onto the land until about June to knock it down. So the very beginning of June. So definitely a lot later than we wanted. So our rye had already kind of gone ahead and gotten to the seed stage, which was not ideal. The rye was probably about 5 or 6 feet tall. Um, so definitely a little bit too much for our liking. So we went ahead and knocked it down. But instead of using a roller crimper, we decided to use a flail mower, which, spoiler alert, do not do. We learned the hard way. It really does not work well. Once we flail mowed it, you're left with like this mulch, and it was really fluffy. And ultimately, it was really challenging for a planter to get through. So you can see here, this was just like all of that mowed rye. Um, and you can see our monosem planter there. And we did attach row cleaners to the very front to try to help clear out space. That didn't seem to penetrate nearly as much as we needed it. Ultimately, no matter what we had tried with this planter, our seeds could not get into the soil. I think it was like 1 out of like 15 seeds were actually getting like the seed depth that we needed, which was incredibly aggravating. Even after adding weight, it was really challenging. And even our row marker there had a hard time penetrating the rye. So we didn't even have straight lines that we were necessarily following with our tractor to know where to put our next row. So all around, it was a pretty rough experience. We then, after giving it a couple hours, trying to brainstorm what exactly we were doing wrong, we spent about 4 hours fiddling with this and got about 2,000-foot rows done, which was aggravating. And because it was such a late spring, we had like very little wiggle room to get this in the ground. So as kind of a last ditch option, we went ahead and grabbed the old zone tiller that we had hanging around. And so I believe that was an Unifirth. I might be pronouncing that wrong. But we went ahead and tried to go through with that. Even that had a hard time making it through some of this rye. And this is our first time using it in like probably like 10 or 15 years. So it could have been, we're a little rusty with it, weren't entirely sure how we were to have it configured. But it was not penetrating through the mulch. And then not only that, but we were having a really hard time following those strips because the machine we had, I think it was about a foot and a half wide strips that we had to plant into. So very little room for error. So after spending probably another 4 hours on that, we went ahead and decided to scrap. So I wouldn't say successfully. We tried to do probably about an acre of no-till pumpkins. We left the ones that had really spotty planting in. Me and one of our farmers, Gilbert, had the joy of going through and pushing all the seeds that didn't make their way through the mat down into the soil, which was a pain for those 1,000-foot rows. So once we got that 1 acre done, we decided to go ahead and rip up all of the rye. So we went ahead and tilled it all in and then planted kind of normally from there on out. Added a little extra nitrogen to account for the nitrogen tie-up with the rye. But this year we are hoping to go ahead, time the rye a little bit earlier so it's not quite as mature. We have access to a roller crimper this season, which we're hoping will really help pack the rye down to make it less fluffy so that we can get through it. So we're hopeful that'll work, but we're going to trial that and then also trial an herbicide knockdown as well, to see which one we prefer, and what ends up working best for the scale that we are trying to farm at. And then who knows, maybe if we're successful, we can move on to winter squashes and stuff, but hopes are not going that high this year. That's all I've got. Oh,
Awesome, Katie.
Sorry.
Yeah.
One last photo. This was the look at what the strip tiller was doing. So you can see like that was just such a sad little row to follow. There was no way we were going to be centering in that. So that's my last photo.
Thank you for sharing. And this is a really great group of knowledge too. So that Momentum Ag group that Mike was mentioning, there's a lot of folks on all different scales who've been trying this. So hopefully we can connect you with other folks who have worked on this. But thank you for sharing, and it'll go great this year. We'll get you on here next year and you're going to talk about how awesome and incredible the no-till was.
Yeah, right. Fingers crossed.
Yeah. We're going to change gears a little bit now. Noah and Sophie presented at MOFGA up in Maine this winter. And I was really impressed with their systems and their knowledge, and I'm super excited that they're willing to jump on here. Their camera's not working, but no, it's a real person, no AI coming here. So hand it over to you guys.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So Sophie and I run Alprilla Farm in Warner, New Hampshire. So we moved our farm. We were farming where I grew up in Essex, Mass, for about 10 years. And now we've done 2 seasons up in Warner where Sophie grew up. And we've moved sort of from the 2 extremes of soil, from heavy silt loam to really sandy soil. But we've found and continue to think that reduced tillage is helpful in both sets of conditions. We've tried a lot of things. We do a CSA and farmers market and wholesale. We're sort of unusual in that we market all of our crops through the winter months. We also rotate with a little bit of wheat and rye and beans and corn. And
So we're pretty small scale compared to the other examples. We're just growing 3 acres of mostly storage crops, but we don't have any hired labor. So, and any way we can reduce hand weeding and weed pressure is really huge.
Crop rotation and crop planning are very important to us. The Eric and Ann Nordell have been really inspirational to us, and critically, their conception of a crop rotation is less about plant family and more about when it's planted and when it's out of the ground. And that's been really helpful for us in planning cropping sequences. Before we moved, we were very close to having a 4-year rotation where the only tillage was a shallow moldboard plowing to turn under red clover following a grain crop. Because most of our crops are harvested in late fall, The biggest weakness from a soil health perspective in our crop rotation is bare ground going into the winter. Planting our onions without tillage has been really helpful for us, especially when we were on heavier soil, because we really struggled to get into the field early enough to plant onions. So we've planted our onions without tillage for years, and this is pretty normal hand scale technique where we tarp in early spring to kill off any chickweed or other winter annual weeds. And then as we have time throughout April, we would spread amendments and compost and then cover it back up again so that weeds can't grow. And what's nice is that we're front loading work. We're basically trading summer weed control for early spring field prep. It's also really helped us keep enough water in the soil for the crop to size up. And I think it's helped us with thrips. So I'll just blast through a few slides of this sequence. Some years this worked really well. There's some, I think, surround I was using to try to discourage thrips. We had some nice crops of onions. If we were able to keep things clean, it was also really nice to be able to just rake mulch to the aisles and push a Planet Junior through to plant greens, or do a quick buckwheat cover crop and then no-till a winter grain in. It's pretty flexible. Squash is another crop that many people grow no-till, and the roller crimper to terminate cover crops has been around for a while, and probably many of you are familiar with it. We're using a homemade, or actually I made it when I was in college.
Shout out to Hampshire College
at
again.
Hampshire College. Roller crimper. It's an old Haybine roller. You can't emphasize enough how important the cover crop is. Planting it early enough and even providing it with fertility is going to pay dividends, both in fertility for the winter squash crop and also weed control, because you're growing your mulch. So that's really important. Timing is also important of when you roll. It has to be at full anthesis, so pollen shed. And it works a lot better in hot, dry weather. And usually I've gone through and hit it again. Here's a picture of rye and Austrian winter peas. Because we grow grain, we've been afraid to grow hairy vetch. Winter peas are awesome if you can get them to grow. Planting window is kind of important. Around September 20th was best for us in Essex. If you plant them too early, they will winter kill. So here we are rolling down the cover crop. It's important to go in all one direction. If you try going back and forth in the field, you get really nasty tangles that mess up every other field operation. Here's our very crude, I guess you'd call it a zipper. We had a big metal funnel we found at a yard sale that someone could follow behind and sprinkle pelletized chicken manure in to get fertilizer down into the planting furrow. We used to transplant winter squash and had a really hard time when we switched to no-till getting past the transplant shock stage. Part of that is because a rye-based cover crop uses a ton of water. So that's something to keep in mind. We now direct seed by hand and have a much better success rate. I think earlier maturity because you don't set your crop back as much. Field of squash. What's nice about winter squash is if you can keep it clean, you can then come in with a no-till drill and plant another cover crop or a winter grain. One challenge with that is that cull winter squash will jam on the coulters and bring the whole thing to a standstill. So that's something to keep in mind. I wish I'd seen Mike's presentation on zone tillage and ripping and zipping before last season. We decided to grow our fall brassicas on a rolled down rye cover crop. And I had gotten a cultivating tractor with a side dresser on it that divided into two holes or two hoses. So I thought I could run a coulter in front of the fertilizer shank ripper on both rows and drop fertilizer into each planting row at the same time. It didn't really work out that way because the pelletized chicken manure wouldn't fall down the hose at the right angle. So I was only able to do one row at a time without it backing up, which could have worked if we hadn't rolled all of the rye in one direction. So I had to then offset the tractor, which resulted in compaction. Also, it didn't help how wet last spring was. So we struggled. Here's me ripping. The broadcast spreader is for a different field. So I'm doing one row at a time. After we ripped and fertilized, we then tarped the whole field. And this was really important because it allowed annual weeds to germinate where the soil had been disturbed and then die. So by the time we transplanted, it was basically a stale seed bed.
We pulled like 5 weeds out of this half acre block for the whole season. There was no weeding whatsoever. It was kind of amazing.
Yeah, that was the big success. The compaction issues really came to bite us later. The crop took off really well, and aside from some voles eating transplants, things were going really, really well. And then in the middle of August, stuff stopped growing. And I pulled up some of the plants, and you could see they had been constricted to the area that the coulter had carved up. And that's where the fertilizer was. That's where the soil was loose. And the roots never really were able to venture out of the planting row. Part of that is I would blame the weather last spring. Part of it is that this is new land to us that was a kind of burned out hayfield. And I think mostly it's compaction. So we sort of need to learn to walk on this land before we can run. I think we were a little premature in converting it to no-till, but the weed control was a big bright spot.
And Becky, I don't know how we're doing on time. We just have like a few more examples we can blow through because I'm sure you want to leave time for questions.
Yeah, you guys have like 7 more minutes.
Okay. So another fall brassica adventure that we had on our old farm, we had a really nice crop of yellow sweet clover that we had broadcast into conventionally tilled winter squash at the last cultivation. And it was like right about just before the vines were starting to hold hands between beds. And we got a really nice stand. And I tried flail mowing it. That went extremely poorly. I made it about 5 feet, and the flail mower was more like a sweet clover winder. And I went about 5 feet and spent the next hour and a half, 2 hours with a utility knife cutting sweet clover stems from around the drum of the mower. So I went back to the barn and got a bush hog and just knocked it down and covered it with a black tarp and said, okay, I'll deal with this in a month when we need to plant. During the period of time that the tarp was on, our team of oxen got out and decided to spend the night snoozing on the tarp. So here is this picture demonstrating the proper form for ox pie discus throwing. And after it had sat and dried out and begun to decay under the tarp, I was finally able to go through and make a pretty smooth bed with the flail mower. I used the small seed box on our no-till drill and just filled 2 of the little compartments with, or I guess I did 3 out of 8 rows. So they were about 20, 24 inches apart. And I did 2 rows rutabaga and 1 row of cheap, I think it was like dwarf Scotch curly kale, just open pollinated cheap seed, and choked it down to the lowest setting and no-tilled the rutabaga and kale. And we had to go through and thin the rutabaga, but it worked pretty well. For more expensive seeded crops like hybrid kale and Napa cabbage, we transplanted. You can see we had some perennial weeds. We really struggled with bindweed on our old farm. In this picture, I think you can see some shepherd's purse and dandelion that are recovering from the tarping that they'd received. But all in all, the weeds weren't too bad. And we grew some nice brassicas. You want to talk potatoes?
Sure. This is another example. So like we were saying, getting into this rotation of reduced tillage, our major plowing event is terminating red clover that we undersow in our grain crops. And we were trying to figure out if there's other ways we can terminate the red clover without plowing, especially because we are often following that with potatoes. So this is just, we had a funny shaped field and this was like a little extra lobe on it. So we sort of turned it into an experiment where we mowed it down. It was an awkward size. So we're just using a weed whacker in this photo. Tried to get it really tight. We then planted the potatoes into the mowed down clover and then solarized the clover. We had a couple of really hot 80-degree days, which is, we don't usually bother solarizing unless we have 2 or 3 days above 80, but we had a good window. So that was before the potatoes came up, so they were tucked in already. And then we mulched with leaves and had some really clean, pretty potatoes at harvest. You can see these were planted a little bit later than to the left is our main crop that was on tilled ground, and those are bigger. I think that might be a discrepancy of planting date.
I think nitrogen availability was lower.
We haven't really figured out how to scale this up, but we'd love to hear from other growers who have been messing around with no-till potatoes because it's definitely a big soil disturbance generally in our rotation. I think that was it for the potato variety. And we maybe have just 1 minute. Do you want to talk about this one?
Sure.
We could just blow through these. We had a drought year, some extra ground to mess with. So we solarized, still planted black beans.
Yeah, so actually we didn't solarize. We had a spring planted oats and peas that went in following fall brassicas. And I flail mowed those and then drilled black beans. It looked really clean in the cover crop, so I didn't think I needed to do weed control. And after I drilled, I looked down and was like, oh, this is going to get weedy. So after the seeds were in the ground, we solarized sort of like a pre-emergent herbicide. And it worked. And then we had some landscape fabric from when we used to grow tomatoes commercially that we put down and didn't really need to do anything else the rest of the season.
And this was a drought year, so we didn't really hand weed this or give it any water. So
or fertilizer.
So it was sort of a Hail Mary, but it ended up to be an okay crop of black beans.
And I have one more thing that we did, or we can just open it up to questions. Whatever you think, Becky.
Maybe we can pause for questions because there's a lot of like yammering in the chat. So I think
Cool.
if
Let me
pause. But thank you guys. That's like so much good information really quickly. Thank you. Does anyone want to pipe up or carry the conversation into the chat? Well, if nobody's gonna talk, maybe you should just give your last
Yeah,
example.
did this work? The hullus barley to the brassicas?
We did this not because it was a good idea, but because we could get irrigation to this field, and we were out of irrigation water in a drought where we had intended to plant. It did work. So let's see, I'm trying to get so right after combining, I used a hay rake to push the straw out of the middle of the field, and then went through with the hay bine and mowed the stubble. And then, I guess I raked then. Then we went through with the ripper and added fertilizer and added drip tape because we were running out of water everywhere. Normally I would just overhead irrigate. And then we hand mulched between the planting rows with the straw that we had pushed to the edge of the field before. I didn't realize how leaky my combine was, but there was a lot of barley coming back up again. So that was something that we really didn't anticipate. And there really wasn't enough fertility. Too much carbon from the straw, not enough water to mineralize organic matter. So it wasn't a crop failure. It was not outstanding either. Ended up, if I did this again, I would certainly make the rows wide enough I could push a lawnmower through. So it's kind of all I got with that. We made it through. It was some food for thought. I think something like dry beans could work really well following hullus barley because of all of the cereal crops it's done before the 1st of July.
You have to talk about your roasting pan though. That was like my favorite.
Oh, it's my
farm hack.
My grandmother's turkey roasting pan worked as a shield to keep chopped up volunteer barley off of the plants.
Every time someone roasts a turkey in that family, they're still looking for it.
I know. Don't tell anyone.
Yeah.
Thank you guys so much.
Desperate time.
Sure.
Awesome to hear from you. One thing I want to say out loud is that Julie Fine, who's here from American Farmland Trust, organizes this group with Lincoln from Momentum Ag, and she put her email here if you want to join the Reduced Tillage listserv. So yeah, Julie is an awesome resource with this group, and Lincoln's been doing a ton of work organizing, like getting farmers together to talk. So I encourage everyone, if you're not on that group, to jump in. Any other parting thoughts or questions while we are all together?
I would just add that, one of the great things among many of working with Lincoln and Julie is Lincoln has been able to consolidate some funds to help us do this, right? So folks who are kind of in the network are, when there's grant out there, he's able to source grants and then, basically help us take the risk of doing some of these trials. And it's made a big difference for me, for one.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that, Mike. I think that's really huge, and it's not just like a stipend. It seems like it's like actually covering like your potential losses, if I understand it correctly. So
Yeah, I'm driving, so my video's off. But do you want to throw my email in the chat?
sure, you can do that.
Thanks. And I'll also drop when I pull over, I will drop in the chat a link to a SARE grant that we just finished that Mike was one of the participants in, that kind of writes up some of the strip till findings there for folks who were interested in that in the chat. There's a little more information in there.
Great, thank you, Lincoln. And
We're putting together a bunch of proposals for different more farmer cohorts for this with participation stipends, and so we'd love to have you join that reduced tillage listserv if you're interested, because we'll keep updating people there.
awesome, thanks, Julie. Last minute question in the chat. Can a conventional water wheel transplanter, like a rainflow model, be converted to no-till by adding coulters on the front somehow?
I think the answer
One.
is maybe. Sorry, go ahead, Lincoln.
They sell a single row one that you can get from Trevor
Brookdale.
Brookdale. It's not very flexible. Yeah, it's one row. It can't be two. It's towed behind. I hear good things about it, but it's going to be for like squash, basically. Stuff has to be, it's for things that are widely spaced. We have also had people go through very successfully, 2 different people go through with like a strip tiller and then follow that with a water wheel. Both of them can drive straighter than I can. I don't think I'd be able to pull that off. But if you can drive really straight, there are 2 examples of farmers, one in Minnesota and I'm trying to remember who the other one is, who've done that as like a 1-2 punch. Does that make sense? But yeah, I think getting in touch with Trevor, because it was relatively new, and I don't know, there may be some improvements that make it a little more flexible and widely, applied to more crops.
And for folks in Vermont, that's a good candidate for the SEEP grant that both Mike and Katie have leveraged as well for reduced tillage equipment. So it's through the state of Vermont, the Capital Equipment Assistance Program. And I can put a link to that in the chat. It comes around in November every year, I think. Mike, do you want to just say out loud what you just put there while I get this?
Yes, so our equipment is available to rent if you're interested. The email's in the chat, but our organization is crwfa.org. CRWFA. It's a mouthful.
I would also say anybody who's thinking about buying a piece of equipment that's specifically designed for tillage reduction, it would really be worth reaching out to Mike or me or Julie before putting in an application for it. There's some stuff that works great kind of off the shelf, and there's a lot of stuff that doesn't. So I think all of us would be happy to just like get an email that's like, hey, this is what I'm looking. We've never met. I don't know you. This is what I'm looking at. What do you think? So yeah, I'll speak for myself. I'd be happy to answer that kind of thing. I think it's easy to make mistakes with pretty expensive pieces of equipment.
Yeah,
Great.
don't email me ever. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Yes.
We'll have a grumpy list and just kidding. Oh, thanks for putting that in, Lincoln. So I'm gonna let everybody go. You're welcome to linger and talk more if you want, but I'm gonna wrap up the recording. And huge thanks, Katie, Noah, Sophie, and Mike. You guys are awesome. Thank you. So generous. And have a great rest of your week, folks.